My name is Howard Brennan. I am 67 years old. And the night my daughter-in-law put both hands on my chest and shoved me down the porch steps of my own home, I was already recording every second of it. I drove myself to the ER with 2 cracked ribs and a fractured wrist. While the nurse was cutting away my sleeve, I sent my attorney a single text message. It said, "They took the bait, all of it." What my son and his wife didn't know was that I had spent the last 8 months building a case. What they also didn't know was that the house they had been circling like wolves around a dying fire had not legally belonged to me for 4 years. And what my daughter-in-law absolutely did not know, as she stood on my porch watching my taillights disappear into the dark, was that there were 6 cameras recording her celebration. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. I spent 31 years as a federal prosecutor in the Northern District of Illinois. I tried organized crime cases, wire fraud, tax evasion, racketeering. I spent 3 decades watching desperate people make catastrophically stupid decisions under pressure. I learned one thing above everything else in those 31 years. A cornered person will always tell you exactly who they are if you give them enough rope and enough time. I retired at 62. My wife, Carol, had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's the year before, and I was not going to spend what time we had left in a courtroom. We had the house in Naperville, the one we had bought the year our son Marcus was born, 43 years ago. Carol had planted the garden herself. Every rose bush, every hydrangea, every stepping stone placed by her own hands. She passed away 18 months after my retirement, in the bedroom upstairs, on a Tuesday morning in October, with her hand in mine. After that, the house became a different kind of place. It became the last living record of her. I kept her garden. I kept her reading chair by the window. I kept her coffee mug on the second shelf because that is where she always put it, and I was not going to be the one to move it. Marcus came to the funeral with his wife, Renata. He had married her 3 years before Carol passed. I had never warmed to Renata, and I had spent considerable effort trying to understand why. She was not unkind to Marcus. She was not openly disrespectful to me. She was simply calculating in the way that some people are calculating, the way you can feel a person measuring a room the moment they walk into it, not to admire it, but to estimate its value. The first sign came 14 months after Carol's funeral. Marcus called on a Sunday evening, which he almost never did, and asked if I had given any thought to my estate planning. I told him I had an attorney. He said he knew that, but had I thought about practical matters, about what would happen to the house if something happened to me, about whether I had a power of attorney in place. I told him I did. There was a pause. Then he said Renata had a cousin who was an estate attorney, and perhaps I might want a second opinion. I told him I was fine, and I changed the subject to football. And we talked for 12 more minutes. And when I hung up, I sat in Carol's reading chair for a long time. That was the first thread. Over the next several months, I found more of them. Marcus began calling more frequently. The calls were pleasant, but had a new texture to them, a probing quality. He asked about my health more than he used to. He mentioned twice that the house was a lot to manage alone. He floated the idea of me moving to a retirement community in Scottsdale, where the weather was easier on older joints. I told him my joints were fine. Then, in March, I discovered the second thread entirely by accident. A college friend of mine, Dennis, who still practiced law in Chicago, called me out of the blue and mentioned he had run into Renata at a legal conference. He thought nothing of it at the time, but he mentioned she had been chatting with a probate attorney who specialized in guardianship proceedings, the kind used to establish that a person is no longer competent to manage their own affairs. I thanked Dennis and made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. Then I went to my office and I opened a new file, Old Habits. Over the following 6 weeks, I hired a private investigator, a woman named Greta, who had worked cases for my office years ago and was now independent and very good. What she found confirmed what my gut had already told me. Renata had met with 2 different attorneys. One specialized in elder guardianship, the other handled real estate transfers. Marcus, for his part, had applied for and been denied 2 personal loans in the past year. He had a credit card balance of just under $40,000, accumulated largely at a casino riverboat in Indiana. He had been going twice a month for at least 18 months. My son had a gambling problem. My daughter-in-law had a plan, and I was the solution to both. I called my own attorney, a woman named Patricia Walsh, who had clerked for a federal judge I respected and had been practicing estate law for 25 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is the mark of a good lawyer. When I finished, she said, "How do you want to handle it?" I said, "I want to handle it the way I handled everything in my career. I want the evidence to be airtight before I move." She said, "Then let's get to work." What we did over the next several months I will not detail completely, because some of it is still a matter of legal record. But the short version is this. I restructured every asset I owned into an irrevocable trust. The house, the investment accounts, the pension income, all of it placed into the Carol Brennan Memorial Trust, with Patricia as the independent trustee. Marcus was not named as a beneficiary. He had not been a beneficiary for 4 years, in fact, because 4 years earlier, he had come to me asking for money to invest in a restaurant venture with a friend. He needed $60,000. I gave it to him, but I am a prosecutor, and I do not give money without documentation, and the documentation he signed in exchange was a full and final waiver of any future claim against my estate. He had signed it without reading it carefully. He was in a hurry. He trusted me to be generous, and I was, but I was also thorough. The restaurant closed after 11 months. I also called Marcus and told him I wanted to spend Christmas together. "Just the three of us," I said. "Come to the house. I'll cook." He sounded surprised, and then very pleased. The particular pleased of a man who believes a plan is coming together. Good, I thought. Let him be pleased. Patricia and I spent 2 weeks before Christmas making certain every element was in place. I had 5 cameras installed by a security firm, the dining room, the living room, the back porch, the front porch, and the hallway outside my office, all of them feeding to a secure cloud server that Patricia monitored remotely. I also installed a simple audio recorder in the breast pocket of my sport coat, a device I had used in the field many years ago that looked like an ordinary pen. I called Marcus 4 days before Christmas, and during the conversation I mentioned, very casually, that I had been thinking about the future. I said I was starting to feel my age. I said I had been having some trouble with the paperwork for my accounts, and perhaps he was right that I could use some help managing things. I said maybe we could talk about it over Christmas dinner. There was a silence on the line. Then Marcus said, "Yeah, Dad, I think that's a really good idea." After we hung up, I sat with Carol's coffee mug in my hands for a moment. Then I put it back on the second shelf exactly where she would have left it. They arrived at 6 in the evening on Christmas Day. Marcus at the wheel of a car I did not recognize, a lease, I would later find out, that he was 2 payments behind on. Renata was in the passenger seat. Her brother Derek was in the back. Derek's presence was not something I had anticipated, and it required a moment of recalibration. He was 38, thick-necked, had done a short stretch for assault in his 20s, and worked now in some loosely defined capacity in real estate that Renata always described vaguely when I asked about it. I had met him twice before. He had a way of walking through a room like he was already deciding what to move. I opened the door with a wide smile. "Marcus, it's good to see you. Come in, come in. Renata, you look wonderful. Derek, what a nice surprise. The more the merrier." Derek smiled, and the smile did not reach his eyes, and I noted it and filed it away. They came in. Derek moved through my entryway the way I had expected, his gaze traveling along the walls, pausing at the framed photographs, lingering at the doorway into the living room. He was doing an inventory. Renata had briefed him on the layout. We sat down to dinner. I had cooked Carol's pot roast recipe, the one that took 4 hours, and which she made every Christmas. The smell of it filled the house. I watched Renata register the smell and then carefully arrange her face into something neutral, because she understood already that this house was about Carol, and Carol was the variable she could not remove. The conversation over dinner was careful on all sides. Renata asked about my health twice, both times phrased as concern, both times with her eyes just slightly too steady. Marcus ate and said little. Derek helped himself to a second plate without being offered and talked about a development deal he was involved with in Phoenix. And I asked questions and kept my voice interested and let him feel like the most important person at the table. This is a technique I learned 30 years ago. Let them perform. The more comfortable they are, the more they reveal. It was after the pie that Renata set down her fork and looked at me with the expression I had been waiting for. It was a practiced expression, warm, sorrowful, reluctantly necessary. The expression of someone who has rehearsed this conversation. "Howard," she said, "we wanted to talk to you about something." I looked up from my coffee. "We've been worried about you," she continued. "This house," she paused, glancing around as though the house itself were evidence. "It's so much for one person. And we've been talking, the three of us, and we think it would be better for everyone if we could be closer, if we could help." I waited. Marcus spoke then. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his coffee cup. "Dad, we were thinking, what if we moved in? Just while we get things sorted. Derek knows people, good people. We could look at getting the house set up differently, more efficiently. So you're not dealing with all of it alone." "Efficiently," I repeated. "The finances," Renata said. And there it was, the word she had been aiming at the entire evening. She said it smoothly, the way a knife goes in when it is sharp enough. "You've always handled everything yourself, and we respect that, but you're 67, Howard. It's a lot. We could manage the accounts, the property taxes, all of it, and you could just relax. You've earned it." I set down my own cup. I looked at the three of them, my son, who could not look at me, my daughter-in-law, who could look at nothing but me, her brother, who was watching the room. I said, "That is very thoughtful." Renata almost smiled. Not quite. I continued, "And what would that look like, practically speaking?" Derek leaned forward then. He was done waiting for the polite version. "We'd need you to sign over a power of attorney," he said, "and we'd need to get the house title sorted. Probably transfer it to a family LLC. Something Renata and Marcus could manage together. Clean, simple, protected." I looked at Derek for a long moment. I had looked at men like Derek across a courtroom table many times. "And if I said no?" I asked. The table went quiet. Renata's expression shifted. "Not much, just enough for me to see what was underneath it." "Howard," she said carefully, "we're not asking you to say no. We're asking because we love you, and we're worried. And honestly," she paused honestly, "there are people who might look at your situation and have real concerns. A man alone at your age, managing significant assets, a large property. It wouldn't take much for someone to suggest that a competency review might be appropriate." She said it gently, the way people say things they mean as threats. "Just to make sure you're protected." There it was. She had just told me exactly who she was. There was a version of me, the version they had been building in their minds for months. The confused widower, the aging man who needed managing, who would have gone pale at that sentence. Who would have heard the word competency and felt the ground shift? Instead, I looked at her and I felt something settle in my chest that I recognized from 31 years of federal prosecution. It was the feeling of watching a defendant place themselves at the scene. I said, "Let me think about it overnight." Renata nodded. "Of course, there's no rush." But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said there was a great deal of rush. Her eyes said that she had not driven 3 hours on Christmas Day to leave without progress. I stood and said I was going to clear the dishes and stepped into the kitchen. I stood at the sink for a moment with my hands on the counter. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the boy who used to follow me around the yard on Saturday mornings while I raked leaves, asking questions about everything, never running out of questions. I thought about Carol telling me once that Marcus had her heart but my stubbornness, and that the combination was going to be either his greatest strength or his undoing. Then I heard Renata's voice from the dining room, low and sharp, the voice she used when she forgot I was in the adjacent room. "He's going to stall," she was saying. "He always stalls. Derek, we go to the attorney on the 27th, regardless. We have enough from the doctor's letter for the preliminary filing. Once the petition is in, he doesn't get to just say no anymore." Doctor's letter. I did not know about a doctor's letter yet. Greta would find out later that Renata had paid a physician in Joliet a man whose license was under review for billing fraud, to write a preliminary opinion about cognitive decline based solely on Renata's description of my behavior. A document built entirely out of fabrication. I turned off the tap. I walked calmly back to the dining room doorway and told them dessert was ready. We ate Carol's Christmas cake. Derek had 2 slices. I watched my son not look at me, and I felt the grief of it. But I had felt that grief for months, and I had learned to carry it like the weight. It was heavy, permanent, mine. After dinner, I told them I was tired. I thanked them for coming. I walked them to the front door, and as I held the door open and Marcus stepped out onto the porch ahead of his wife, I said, "Renata, I have been thinking about what you said, about the house, about the future, and I want you to know that my answer is no. It is going to stay no, and I believe you already knew that." She stopped. She turned. Something crossed her face that was not quite surprise. She was too controlled for surprise, but was the recalibration of a plan that had encountered an obstacle. "Howard," she said, "I don't think you understand the position you're putting yourself in." "I understand it completely," I said. She stepped back toward me. Her voice dropped. "Do you understand what a guardianship filing looks like? Do you understand what that process does to a person's ability to make decisions about their own property? Because once that petition is filed, Howard, once a judge looks at that letter, and at you, an elderly man living alone in a house worth a great deal of money, with no one managing his affairs." "I am managing my affairs," I said. "Quite well." That was when Derek stepped back up onto the porch. He was not aggressive in an overt way. He was the kind of large man who uses his size as punctuation. He moved close enough that I could smell his aftershave. He said, "Old man, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at him. I said, "I'd like you to step back." He did not step back. And Renata, who had been the measured one, the careful one, the one running the long strategic play, did something she had not planned to do. She took 2 steps forward and put both of her hands flat against my chest and pushed. It was not a small push. She was angry and she was frightened, and she had the force of 8 months of frustrated planning behind it. I went backward off the edge of the porch. It was 2 steps down. I caught the railing with my left hand and broke the fall partially, but my right wrist hit the flagstone path and my ribs found the lower step, and I lay there for a moment in the cold dark of Christmas night looking up at the porch. Light. I heard Marcus say her name, just her name. I heard Derek say, "What did you just—" I heard Renata's breathing, fast and shallow. I lay still for a moment. The pain was considerable. My wrist was bad. My ribs were worse. I breathed carefully and did a prosecutor's quick inventory. Nothing catastrophic, everything documentable. I got to my feet without help. I did it slowly, the way a 67-year-old man with cracked ribs does it. But I did it without anyone's assistance, and I did it with my face completely level. I looked at the 3 of them on the porch. Marcus had finally found my eyes. He looked like a man watching something collapse that he had believed was still standing. I picked up my keys from where they had fallen on the path. I walked to my car. I heard Renata say something, some version of the word accident, some version of the word sorry, some version of the calculation that was already beginning inside her head. I did not turn around. I drove to Northwestern Memorial at exactly the speed limit. I signaled at every turn. My right hand could barely grip the wheel by the time I arrived, but I parked neatly in the ER bay and walked through the automatic doors under my own power. The admissions nurse started to rise from her chair when she saw me, and I held up my left hand. I said, "My name is Howard Brennan. My date of birth is March 4th, 1957. At approximately 9:15 this evening at my home in Naperville, my daughter-in-law, Renata Harlow Brennan, intentionally pushed me from my porch. I have injuries to my right wrist and my right rib cage. Before you treat me, I need the hospital's patient advocate, and I need photographs of every injury exactly as it appears right now. I also need it noted in my chart that I drove myself here and that I arrived alert, oriented, and fully competent." She stared at me for a moment. Then she reached for the phone. The attending physician, a young resident named Dr. Okafor, confirmed 2 cracked ribs and a displaced fracture of the right distal radius. She said I would need a cast and pain management and rest, and that I was, in her professional opinion, lucky the fall had not been worse. I asked her to document the angle and nature of the bruising consistent with an impact from a push rather than a fall. She gave me a careful look and then said she could document what the injury pattern suggested and that the bruising on my sternum was consistent with bilateral hand pressure. "Thank you," I said. "I would like that in writing." While she wrapped my wrist, I sent Patricia a single text. "Porch. All 4 cameras. Wrist and ribs. ER now. Phase 2. She replied in 40 seconds. "Footage secured. On my way." They sent 2 officers, a younger woman named Officer Tran and an older man named Officer Kowalski, who had the measured cadence of someone 20 years into the job. I told them what happened. I told them calmly and in precise detail, because I had spent 30 years telling juries exactly what happened, and I understood that the first account is the one that anchors everything that follows. Officer Tran took notes. Officer Kowalski watched me with the particular attention of a man trying to determine what category the situation belonged to. When I finished, he said, "Do you want to press charges, Mr. Brennan?" I said, "Not tonight." They both looked at me. I said, "My daughter-in-law will tell you I fell. My son will confirm it. Her brother will confirm it. Tonight, it is their 3 voices against mine and a set of injuries that can be argued. I would like you to go to the house, speak to them, and file a report. I would like that report to exist, but I am not pressing charges tonight." Kowalski said, "Sir, with respect, I know how it looks," I said. "I have been a prosecutor for 31 years. I understand exactly how it looks. I need them to believe they have won. Can you do that for me? Can you go there, speak to them, be neutral, and file the report?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "We'll file the report." Patricia arrived 40 minutes later while they were still casting my wrist. She stood in the doorway of the exam room in her coat with her briefcase, and she looked at the cast and she looked at my face. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I am better than they are going to be." She sat down in the plastic chair by the bed. She opened her briefcase and set a folder on her knee. She said, "The footage is clean. All 4 porch cameras. The push is completely clear. Dr. Okafor's report is already in the cloud server, and I spoke to our PI. She has the communications between Renata and the Joliet physician." I leaned back against the pillow and thought about my son standing on that porch saying nothing. Patricia said quietly, "Howard, you know we could stop it here. We have enough." "I know," I said. She waited. "But I need them to come back to the house," I said. "I need them to do what they are planning to do, which is access my financial documents, contact my bank, and attempt to execute that fraudulent guardianship petition. I need every piece of that on record. I need it to be a case so complete that there is no version of the story in which they are anything other than what they are." She nodded. She understood. She had seen me work before. "I also need to find out," I said, "what Marcus would do if the pressure was gone." She looked at me. I told her what I had done 2 months earlier. I had contacted the Indiana Gaming Commission through a private channel, a former colleague who now worked in regulatory enforcement, and submitted documentation of Marcus's debt and his creditor situation. The debt had been quietly resolved through a negotiated settlement that I had funded anonymously through an LLC. His debt was gone. He did not know it yet. But as of 6 weeks ago, the thing that was driving him toward Renata's plan, the financial panic underneath everything, had been removed. Patricia looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "You wanted to see what he would do?" "Yes," I said. "And he came to your house on Christmas Day with his wife and her brother and let her push you off your porch?" "He did," I said. I lay in the hospital bed and I thought about Carol. I thought about the way she used to say that Marcus had my stubbornness. I thought about whether stubbornness was really the right word for what Marcus had. I thought that what he actually had was a willingness to let someone else make the hard decisions, and that the problem with that particular quality was that eventually you let the wrong person make one. They discharged me the following morning with a cast to my elbow and a prescription I did not intend to fill. Patricia drove me not to Naperville, but to a hotel in the city, the kind of quiet, well-appointed place that serves as a temporary base for people managing difficult situations. We had booked it the week before under her firm's corporate account. I settled in and opened my laptop and pulled up the secure server feed. They had gone back to my house. Of course they had. Renata was not the type to absorb a setback and retreat. She was the type to accelerate. The police visit had apparently gone exactly as I had expected. Kowalski and Tran had arrived. Marcus had told them I tripped. Renata had expressed tearful concern for my stability. Derek had stood in the background, looking cooperative. The officers had left, and within 20 minutes of the police car pulling out of the driveway, the three of them had gone back inside. My house key. Marcus still had it from a visit 2 years ago, when he had stayed for a week to help me after a minor surgery. I had not asked for it back. Greta had noted 6 weeks ago that he still carried it on his keychain. I had been counting on that. I watched on the feed as they moved through my house. Renata went immediately to my office. She sat at my desk and began going through the drawers, methodical and quick. She found the folder I had left in the top right drawer, the one labeled AC Counts current in my handwriting, and she opened it and spread the papers across the desk and took photographs of each page with her phone. The documents in that folder were real. They were also entirely the wrong documents. They showed a picture of my finances as they had existed 4 years ago, before the trust restructuring. They showed a man with a house, free and clear, a pension, and approximately $300,000 in accessible accounts. Everything in that folder said, "There is money here, and it is unprotected." Patricia had prepared the decoy documents herself. Renata sent the photographs to someone, her attorney. We would later confirm, and then went to my filing cabinet, which I had left unlocked, and continued her inventory. Derek, meanwhile, had gone upstairs. The hallway camera showed him going room to room. He spent 8 minutes in the master bedroom. I watched him open Carol's wardrobe and go through it with his hands, checking the back of the shelves, lifting the sweaters. He did not throw anything on the floor. He was more careful than that, and somehow the care made it worse. Marcus stayed downstairs. He sat on the couch in the living room and did not move for 40 minutes. He did not help Renata. He did not follow Derek upstairs. He just sat on my couch in the house he grew up in and stared at the middle distance with his hands on his knees. At some point, Renata came out of the office and asked him something. He said something back. I turned up the audio on the living room feed. She was saying, "I filed it. Kowalski's report plus the doctor's letter, plus the incident on the porch. The petition is in, Doctor. Barnes says the preliminary evaluation can happen within 72 hours. Once the evaluation is on record, we can move for emergency temporary guardianship and get access to the accounts while the full hearing is pending." Marcus said, "What happens to him?" She said, "He's taken care of. He'll be comfortable." He said, "That's not what I asked." There was a silence. He said, "Where does he go, Renata? When we take the house, where does my father go?" She said, very quietly, "Marcus, he is not going to just give it to you. He has made that clear. This is the only way." Marcus said nothing. She said, "You owe $40,000 on cards alone. The debt in Indiana is gone. I don't know how, but the cards are still real. We can't keep living the way we're living. This is the way out." Marcus said, "I know." She said, "Then stop asking me questions that don't have good answers." She went back to the office. Marcus stayed on the couch. He put his face in his hands and sat like that for a long time, and I watched him, and I understood that he knew. He knew exactly what this was. He was not deceived by Renata. He was not being manipulated by her in the way that weak people are manipulated by strong ones. He was choosing. Every hour he sat on that couch and did not stop her was a choice. I had cleared his debt. I had removed his reason, and he was still sitting on the couch. I called Patricia. She said, "I see it." I said, "How long do we let them stay?" She said, "They've been in there 2 hours. Trespassing is clean. Accessing the filing cabinet adds unauthorized access to financial documents. And Renata accessing those accounts documents is fraud. We have all 3 on camera." I said, "Call Kowalski." She said, "Already dialing." The second visit from the police was different from the first. This time, it was not a wellness check. This time, 2 squad cars came, and with them came a detective named Aguilar from the Economic Crimes Unit, whom Patricia had briefed directly that afternoon. I watched on the feed as the lights swept across the living room window. I watched Renata come out of the office and stand very still for a moment. I watched Derek appear at the top of the stairs. I watched Marcus stand up slowly from the couch. Then my phone rang. It was Patricia. She said, "They're at the door. Are you ready?" I said, "I've been ready since March." I was not at the hotel. That is what they believed, that I was at a friend's, confused and frightened, licking my wounds. I had, in fact, driven back to Naperville 2 hours earlier and entered the house through the garage, which Renata did not have access to, and I had been sitting in the small room off my office that Carol and I had always called the reading room. It was where I kept my law books and my case files, and the old leather chair that had been my father's, and it had a sliding door concealed behind a built-in bookcase that Carol had designed herself because she thought it was delightful and architectural, and because she had very good taste. I heard the knock at the front door. I heard Marcus open it. I heard Detective Aguilar's voice. "Mr. Brennan?" "I'm Detective Aguilar. Is Howard Brennan here?" Marcus said, "No. He left last night, after a fall. He went to stay with a friend." Aguilar said, "I see. Are you Marcus Brennan?" "Yes. And who else is in the house?" Marcus hesitated. "My wife. And her brother." Aguilar said, "I'm going to need all 3 of you to step outside, please." That was when Renata came down the hall, composure assembled, voice already calibrated to concerned family member. "Detective, what is this about?" "We're just here checking on the house, while Howard is recovering. He's not well." "Ma'am," Aguilar said, "I'm going to need you to step outside." I pressed the button on the intercom built into the reading room wall. It fed to a small speaker in the office, and when I spoke, my voice filled the room they were standing in. I said, "She has photographs of the documents on her phone, Detective. The filing cabinet beside the desk. She accessed it approximately 90 minutes ago." The silence that followed was complete. Then Renata said, in a voice I had not heard from her before, stripped of the warmth, stripped of the calculation, entirely raw, "Who is that?" I pressed the button again. I said, "The filing cabinet, the top drawer. There's a red folder. That is the one she opened first." I heard movement. I heard Aguilar say something to his partner. I heard Derek say what the end stop himself. I stood up from the reading room chair. I straightened my coat. I looked at Carol's photograph on the desk beside me, the one from the summer we drove the Pacific Coast Highway, her hair blown sideways, laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. I touched the edge of the frame. Then I opened the bookcase door and stepped into the office. They were grouped by the desk, Renata with her hands still near the filing cabinet, Derek against the far wall, Marcus in the doorway. Detective Aguilar and his partner were in the hall. 2 uniformed officers were behind them. Renata looked at me. She looked at the cast on my arm. She looked at the door I had just stepped through. And for the first time in 8 months of planning and maneuvering and calculated pressure, I watched her run out of moves. I said, "Hello, Renata." She said nothing. I turned to Aguilar. I said, "The security footage from last evening's incident on the porch is available on a cloud server. I can have my attorney send you the access link within the hour. The footage from inside the house tonight is on the same server. You can confirm what was accessed and when." Aguilar looked at me with the expression of a man recalibrating. He said, "Mr. Brennan, you staged this." I said, "I documented it. There is a difference. One is deception. The other is evidence collection." He almost smiled. Derek took one step toward the door, and the officer at the back said, "Sir, please don't." Derek stopped. Marcus had not moved from the doorway. He was looking at me with an expression I could not entirely name. It was not the terror that Renata wore. It was not the trapped animal quality that had come over Derek. It was something quieter. Something that looked, to me, like a man recognizing the exact point at which his life changed permanently. I looked at my son. I said, "I cleared your debt, Marcus. 6 weeks ago, the Indiana situation. All of it. He blinked. You didn't have to be here, I said. You didn't have to come on Christmas. You didn't have to sit on that couch and let this happen. I gave you a way out. I wanted to see what you would do with it. His face did not collapse the way I had seen faces collapse in courtrooms. It simply went still, the way water goes still after you drop something into it, and the ripples finally reach the edges, and there is nothing left to move. He said, I didn't know you knew. I said, I knew everything. He said, about the gambling, about all of it. I said, for 8 months. He looked at the floor. I said, you are your mother's son, Marcus. She would not have been able to bear this. And neither can I, not because of what you tried to take, because of what you threw away. Detective Aguilar cleared his throat. He said, Mr. Brennan, I have enough here for tonight. I'd like to take statements from all parties. Patricia had arrived by then, standing in the hallway with her briefcase, and she said, Detective, I'll coordinate the statement process. I have documentation for the trespassing, the unauthorized access to financial records, the fraudulent guardianship petition filed today with falsified medical documentation, and the assault from last evening. Renata said, that petition is legal. We have a doctor's. Patricia said, the doctor in question is currently under investigation by the Illinois Medical Board for billing fraud. His professional opinion on your father-in-law's cognition, rendered without ever meeting him, based solely on your verbal description, falls considerably short of the evidentiary threshold for a guardianship proceeding. The filing will be dismissed. The false medical documentation, however, is a matter we intend to pursue with the state's attorney. Renata went pale. I turned to Aguilar and said, before you proceed, I'd like you to open the safe. He looked at me. I walked to the wall safe behind the desk, the one Renata had noted in her photographs, the one she had been circling for months, the one that in her imagination held everything she had come to take. I entered the code. The door opened. She craned to see. I watched her. I reached inside and removed a single document. It was the waiver Marcus had signed 4 years ago. I set it on the desk, facing Aguilar. I said, this house is held in an irrevocable trust. My son signed away his interest in this property in exchange for $60,000 to fund a business venture 4 years ago. He is not a beneficiary. He has no legal claim. The trust is administered by Patricia Walsh, whose card is at the top of that document, and the trust's final disposition, the house, the accounts, all of it is a charitable endowment. Renata said, what charity? Patricia said, the Carol Brennan Center for Elder Law Advocacy at Northwestern. It's already endowed. The house will fund a legal clinic for seniors facing exactly this type of financial exploitation. The silence that came after that was the particular silence of people absorbing the fact that they have been entirely, permanently outmaneuvered. Derek sat down in my desk chair without being invited. He looked at the floor. Renata made one more effort. She was extraordinary in her persistence, I will give her that. She looked at me and she said, you set us up. You manipulated this entire situation. Any attorney worth anything will argue entrapment. I said, I'm not a police officer. Entrapment is a law enforcement doctrine. Private citizens are under no obligation to make criminal behavior easy to avoid. You chose to file a fraudulent medical petition. You chose to enter this house without permission. You chose to push me off my porch. I documented your choices. That is not a trap. That is a record. She had nothing left after that. The hearings took 4 months. Patricia presented the security footage, the medical documentation, the financial records, and my own testimony. I did not need to perform weakness in that courtroom. I was the same man I had always been, which turned out to be the most effective thing I could offer, a 67-year-old man in a cast, sitting at a table, speaking in complete sentences, describing 8 months of methodical evidence collection. The guardianship petition was dismissed in the first week, with the court recommending a referral to the state's attorney's office regarding the falsified medical evaluation. The physician who signed the letter lost his medical license 8 months later. Renata was convicted on charges of elder financial abuse, criminal trespass, unauthorized access to financial records, and felony assault. She was sentenced to 6 years. Her attorney tried very hard, The porch camera footage made it difficult for him. Derek was convicted on criminal trespass and complicity charges. 18 months. Marcus was not in that courtroom. He had cooperated fully with the prosecution from the first week, providing documentation of Renata's communications and the sequence of planning that had led to Christmas night. In exchange, and on the recommendation of the prosecutor whom Patricia had briefed carefully, he received a deferred sentence contingent on restitution and 2 years of supervised probation. He also checked himself into a treatment program for gambling addiction in February. I know this because he told me. He called on a Sunday morning, which is when he used to call, and he said that he was doing it and that he did not expect anything from me, and that he was not calling to ask for anything. He was calling because he thought I should know. I said, I appreciate you telling me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Did you really clear the debt before Christmas? I said, Yes. He said, Why? I said, Because I wanted to see who you would be when the pressure was off. I needed to know. Another silence. He said, And now you know. I said, I know who you were in December. I don't know who you're going to be. It was the truest thing I could tell him. I am sitting in Carol's garden as I write this. It is May. The roses she planted along the south fence have come in better than any year I can remember. Thick and full, and an absurd shade of pink that she always said was almost too much and planted more of every spring anyway. The stepping stones she chose are still there, still exactly where she placed them, worn a little smoother than they were. The cast came off in February. There is no lasting damage. The ribs healed. The wrist is sometimes stiff in cold weather, which is the kind of thing you accept at 67. The Carol Brennan Center opened its doors in April in a suite of offices at Northwestern, funded by the initial endowment from the trust. Patricia runs the advisory board. We have 4 attorneys on staff and 2 retired judges who consult. Last month, we took on 17 cases, seniors, in Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, facing guardianship petitions, unauthorized financial transfers, property disputes with adult children. Cases I know from the inside. Cases where the outcome depends on whether someone answers when you call. My son called again last week. We talked for 20 minutes. It was careful and imperfect and real in the way that things are real when they have cost something. I do not know what it becomes. I know that the version of him that sat on my couch on Christmas night and chose to let things happen, I do not think that is who he is entirely. I think it is who he was when he was frightened and weak and letting someone else steer. What he is, without that, I am still finding out. So is he. The hardest thing I ever prosecuted was a financial crimes case that involved a man I had once respected. He had been methodical, intelligent, careful, and he had built something genuinely harmful over 15 years. And when the evidence finally landed in front of a jury, there was nothing he could say because the record was simply there, complete and quiet and permanent. Afterward, a colleague asked me if I felt anything about it. I thought about it and said, I feel the same thing I feel at the end of every good case. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something more like clarity. That is what I feel now, sitting in Carol's garden, with the roses she planted in full bloom and the stepping stones she chose still exactly where she left them. Not triumph, clarity. If you are watching this and you recognize any part of it, the circling conversations, the sudden concern for your finances, the word competency dropped like a stone into still water, please understand that you have the right to document what is happening to you. You have the right to legal counsel. You have the right to protect what you built. Your kindness is not weakness. Your patience is not confusion. Your quiet is not an invitation. Do not let anyone mistake it for one. Like and subscribe if you believe that experience counts for something. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and tell me what would you have done.